Okay, I think that I've got it. All right, so trying to record a video, and hopefully you can see all this here while I'm recording. And this is going to be a lesson on representing fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions. So I am here. I've got Yoda here. Yoda's ready. This is my student today. And if you notice at the top, so let me bring up my little highlighter. This is what we're going to be able, so these are kind of our learning goals here that we should be able to do at the end of this lesson. I can represent fractions as decimals and decimals using objects. I can relate fractions to decimals using objects. And I can write the decimal and fraction equivalent for a model. Okay, and we know that we've talked about models being just pictures that don't have numbers, but they represent a number. All right, so I'm going to clear that out so I can scroll down. All right, so hopefully you guys are able to pull this up and see this on your Chromebook. I tried to have it shareable to you as a PDF document that you can write on. But we have a key, so the key tells us what the pictures represent. And here it looks like what in the past we've talked about as a 100 block, but we know when we're talking about decimals, that this 100 block is actually just one whole. And we can write that with the number 1 or as 1.00. So here's my 1 whole. And then down here, we have, if you scroll down just a little bit, what in the past we thought of as a 10 strip, this is actually going to be 1/10 because it takes 10 of these to make one whole. So this is 1/10. This model or picture represents 1/10, and we can write that as 0.10 or 0.1. Okay, and then the last little block, which in the past we had previously thought of as just one single block, this is actually going to be 100th, not 100, but 100th with a TH. So we have 0 ones, the decimal, to separate the whole numbers from the decimal places. We have 0/10ths and 100th. And 100th, just like it sounds, it takes 100 of these little guys to make one whole. And it takes 10 of these little guys to make one of these. Takes 10 of these strips to make one whole. And that's why we call decimals a base 10 system, because to go from one decimal place to another, we are either multiplying by 10 or dividing by 10. All right, so I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go past the money for a minute and go to fractions. And we've done fractions in the past, but I just wanted to kind of review, because fractions and decimals are related, and that's why we're talking about equivalent fractions and decimals. For every fraction, I can write an equivalent decimal, and for every decimal, I can write an equivalent fraction. So if you look at this first pizza here on the left, we see that it's a whole pizza, but it's divided into 2 parts. And that's easy to see because there's a line. And then also the denominator, the bottom number, tells me that it's divided into 2 equal parts. And so we call that fraction 1/2, not 1/2 or 1/2. Here we have same size pizza, but this one's divided into 4 sections. And again, it's easy to see that, but I also know because of the denominator 4 that this pizza is divided into 4 parts, because the denominator tells me how many parts I've divided my whole thing, whatever it is, block, pizza, pie, whatever it is, into. So in this case, it's divided into 4 parts, 1/4. Another name, I guess, for 1/4 is also 1/4. So we have 1/4 of the pizza here, and another quarter, a third quarter, and a fourth quarter makes 1 whole pizza. So 1/4 can also be called 1/4. Okay, then my last pizza I know is divided into 12 sections, and I could count them, but I know it's 12 sections because the denominator there tells me it's 12 sections. So we have fractions and decimals when we have a part of something, not the whole thing. Like these pizzas right here, you can see are not the whole thing. So we have 3 pieces out of what would have been 6 to start with, 3/6, which is also equal to a half. Here we only have 2/6 of the whole pizza. So 2/6 is also equal to 1/3. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of an 8-slice pizza. So I have 6/8, but that's also equal to 3/4, and so on. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 6, 4/6, which is also equal to 2/3. Okay, so fractions and decimals represent a part of something, and they also have equivalent. So we can make an equal fraction from any decimal. We can make an equal decimal from any fraction. Okay, so going back to, I should clarify, any repeating or terminating decimal. So any repeating, terminating decimal can be expressed as a fraction. Okay, so now we're going to talk about money because everybody likes money. And with decimals, that's kind of something that we're all familiar with. And one of our most common uses of decimals is to represent money. So we know in our country, so other countries have different money systems, but we use the dollar. That's kind of the whole monetary, amount, $1. So that it represents 1 whole unit of money, which is $1. But sometimes we have less than $1, and that's where we have coins, or sometimes we call it change because we need to represent less than $1. So $1 we can write in money with a $sign, 1.00, 1 whole dollar with no change. But sometimes we don't have a whole dollar and we have 1/4. And the way we would write that as a decimal, there's $0, decimal 2/10 and 5/100, which is 25/100 total. Remember, we always say the place value where the last number is located. So the 5 is in the 100th place. So 25 cents or 1/4 can also be said as 25/100. So I'm actually going to use my pen and I'm going to write that because 25/100 expressed here as a decimal can also be written as the fraction 25/100. So if you need to pause the video and get some paper and something to write with, you can pause it now. You can be writing this on your screen if you have the PDF file up where you can do that. But otherwise, you can just write this on any kind of paper with anything that you have to write with. If you have a pencil, that's great. So I have written a fraction 25/100, 25 in my numerator, 100 in my denominator, to represent this decimal 25/100, and they are equivalent, they're equal. Now, some of you, we've talked about simplifying fractions, so some of you might notice right off the bat that this fraction is not simplified, meaning there is a factor, a number that can be divided into 25, and a number that can be divided into 100, so they have a common factor. Therefore, we can simplify this fraction. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, now we always want to try to use the greatest common factor, which we abbreviate as GCF, but maybe we don't always recognize it, and that's okay. You might have to simplify more than once, but you might recognize the greatest common factor between 25 and 100 is, in fact, 25. So I can divide by that factor in my numerator, 25 divided by 5, and don't laugh at my mouse writing because I don't have a pen or a stylus, and I can do 100 divided by 25. Okay, So I have 25 divided by 25. That is equal to 1. And I have 100 divided by 25. That is equal to 4. Okay. So I have 1/4, which is less than one whole dollar. The way we write that in decimals would be 0.25, which is 25 hundredths. And the fraction that would be in simplest form is 1/4. Okay. So I'm not sure if you realize that 1/4 is equal to 1/4. All right, next we have a dime. So we know a dime, again, is less than a dollar. It's part of a dollar. And the way we write it in decimal form, so it takes 10 of these. Oh, and interestingly, let's go back to the quarter. So it equals 1/4. And notice how it takes 4 of these quarters to make $1. So this is 1/4 or 1/4 of a dollar. All right, the dime, so it's going to take 10 of these to make $1. Ooh, I didn't mean to write on that. Let me erase. So it's going to take 10 dimes to make $1. All right, and here we have the dime written in decimal form, which is 0.10. Okay, so we can read that as 10 hundredths because with money, we always use 2 decimal places. Or if you remember that when you have a 0 at the end of a decimal, you can kind of just ignore it or cross it out. And you can say that's 1/10. Okay, but just for the fun of it, we're going to say that's 10 hundredths. So my fraction, this is 10 hundredths in decimal form. My fraction is also going to be 10 hundredths. Okay, so we've got a fraction and its equivalent decimal. So hopefully, too, you've realized that, wait a minute, that fraction, 10 hundredths, is not in simplest form. So we need to simplify that, and we need to divide by a common factor. So I need to divide my numerator and my denominator by a number that can go into 10 and 100. And we want to try to use the greatest common factor because that makes it easier. We only have to simplify one time. So I'm going to divide by 10. And I'm going to divide by 10. Okay, 10. I have jets. I live at the oceanfront. You can hear the jets. I'm sorry about the jet noise. All right, 10 divided by 10 is 1. I'm kind of used to it. I don't even notice it anymore. And 100 divided by 10 is 10. Okay, pretty easy, right? We have 1 dime. There's my decimal equivalent. There is my fraction equivalent. And interestingly, 1/10, it takes 10 dimes to make $1. Okay, pretty easy so far, right? Okay, so what I want you to do is try, and you can pause the video for a second, try the nickel, which is 5 hundredths, and the penny, which is 1/100th, on your own. I want you to try to write a fraction equivalent for the decimal, and then I want you to, if you need to, simplify. So I will give you a hint that one of these will need to be simplified. Oops, let me erase that. Okay, so this is my first time trying this. Don't laugh. You guys know I was technologically challenged at school, so no different here. All right, so go ahead and pause the video, try that on your own. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to work this out. You paused it. All right, 1 nickel, I wrote that in decimal form as 0.05, and that is equal to 5 hundredths. Because my 5 is in my hundredths place, So my fraction is 5/100ths. Now I know maybe you've realized too, but I should always with a fraction ask myself if it's in simplest form. So is there a number that can divide into 5 that also goes into 100? And yes, there is. Little helpful hint, 5 can go into any number that ends in a 5 or a 0. That's the only numbers that 5 can be divided into. If a number ends in 5 or ends in 0, then you can divide it by 5. So I'm going to divide by 5 because that is my greatest common factor. Hope that you're writing this on your paper or on your computer as you go. So I've got 5 divided by 5. That is 1. And 100 divided by 5. So if you're not sure, we've done in the past, you can do tally marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can make 5 tally marks counting up to 100. You can use your fingers, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. But 100 divided by 5 is in fact 20. So my fraction equivalent for a nickel, which is 5/100ths, is 1/20th. So the way we say that is 1/20th. And interestingly, it takes 20 nickels to make a dollar. Okay, now our penny. Penny should be pretty easy. 1 penny in decimal form is 1/100th because we have the ones place here. The decimal point separates the whole numbers from the decimal places. Tenths, but we have no tenths, and we have 1/100th. And so we just write that just like it sounds, 1/100th. Okay. Whoops, that's a 0. Pretend that's a 0. Okay. All right, so 1/100th, and that is in simplest form because 1 is in my numerator, and so no number can be divided into 1 except 1. So it's not really prime or composite, it's just a special number, the number 1. All right, so that's our money system, dollars and quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, written as decimals and an equivalent fraction. So I'm going to erase this. And we are going to scroll down now, past our pizzas, and we should have this table. We've got a picture model, but remember this is not 100 anymore. This is just 1. We've got a column for decimals. We've got a column for fractions, and I put the S because you might have to simplify it. And then we've got a column for words. All right, so I'm going to shade in this picture so we can figure out what decimal, fraction, and words we need to write. So let me see, I'm going to use the highlighter so we can see through it. I'll use green. All right, so okay. All right, I colored a little bit outside the lines, but you guys get the point. Okay, so here's my model. If you're doing this at home and you do have your PDF version up on your screen, you can go ahead and try to color that in. For my decimal, okay, we know that this is 1, not 100. So how many little blocks did I color? Okay, so my 1 is divided into hundredths, 100 little tiny blocks. And remember, each little block is 1/100th. And each strip is 1/10. So there's 2 ways to attack this. We can count each individual little block. And if you count them up, you'll realize that I've colored in 50 out of 100, 50 hundredths. So I would write that, and move. Oh, why isn't it moving? Let's put it over here. Now it's over me. Okay, I'll just write it. Okay, I'm gonna type it, but all right. So if I'm counting each individual, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so I would have 50 out of 100, 50 hundredths. So I can write that as 0 ones and 50 hundredths. Okay, so maybe you notice though, I colored whole strips. I colored 5 whole strips. And remember those whole strips, and my cat and my dog are fighting. I don't know if you can hear them. Playing, they're playing. They're not fighting, they're playing. Okay, so I colored 5 of these strips. And remember those strips represented 1/10. So how many tenths did I color? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths. So I have 0 ones and 5 tenths. Okay. So remember that we said at the end of a decimal, if there's a 0, you can kind of ignore it and just pretend it's not there. So I'm going to cross that out. And we're just going to work with this decimal here. So I have 0 and 5 tenths. Because remember, there's no ones place. So this is the tenths with a TH. So how would I write that as a fraction? I want you to go ahead and try to write it now. Okay, hopefully you've written something. So I can write 5 tenths. Colored 5 of these strips out of 10 total strips on my block. So that is 5 tenths. This is also my decimal 5 tenths. You may have noticed all of this, and we should always ask ourselves with every fraction, is it in simplest form? Is there a number that can go into 5 that also goes into 10? And yes, there is. So I think you guys, many of you already have this memorized, that 5 tenths is in fact 1/2. But the way we get there is we're going to divide. Remember, 5 can go into any number that ends in a 5 or a 0. So I'm going to divide by 5. I'm going to divide by 5. And 5 divided by 5 is equal to 1. And 10 divided by 5 is equal to 2. So I have a picture model, I have an equivalent decimal, and I have an equivalent fraction. So how will we write that in words? Okay, well, let's do it. I can write 5 tenths. It'd be so much easier if I actually had a pen. Or a mouse. Maybe I'll have to attach a mouse. That would be easier. Or I have 1/2. Oh, this is hilarious. Okay, hope you guys are enjoying this. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in this next block, and I'm going to shade in this circle. So we'll have 2 models, and I want you guys to try to complete the next 2 rows, rows go across, rows independently, okay? And then we're going to stop for today. I'm going to try to post this, and then we'll finish it up tomorrow. So let me get my little highlighter here. I'm going to shade. Let me make it skinnier so I have a little bit more control. All right, so I'm going to shade right here. That wasn't too bad. And then I'm going to come down and up right there. Okay, that's it. Okay, so hopefully that's clear enough that you guys can see what I shaded. All right, so you're gonna fill in the decimal, the fraction, trying to put the fraction in the simplest form, and then the words, and we'll come back and look at this again and finish it up tomorrow. Okay. And then I'm gonna do the circle. I'll switch to a different color. What should we do? I'll do pink for Cam. All right, so I'm gonna do 3 parts of my circle. Now this part might be a little bit tricky. So I think I just realized we should do this one together. All right, we're gonna do this one together because I think it might be a little bit confusing. Okay. So here I'm gonna do the circle together, but I'm gonna let you guys try this one on your own after we stop the video. Okay, so I've got this circle divided into 4 parts. So I know as far as fractions, my denominator is going to be 4. So I'm going to start with my fraction and kind of skip my decimal here for a second. All right, so I've got a circle divided into 4 parts. My denominator is 4. Then I've shaded 1, 2, 3 parts out of 4. So that's my numerator, 3 out of 4, or we can call that 3/4. Now, to change that to a decimal, though, there's no fourths decimal place. That's not going to work. So I need to change it to either tenths or 100ths. So let's start with tenths and see if that'll work. Can I change 3/4 into an equivalent fraction, some number over 10? I don't know what this is. Can I do it? I don't know. So I'll put a question mark if I can do it. Okay, so I have to ask myself, since I know that this is 3/4 and I want it to be something over 10, I'm trying to change it to a decimal, tenths. Is there a number that I can multiply 4 times that number to give me 10? 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. No, 4 does not go into 10 evenly. So tenths is not going to work. So I'm going to need to erase that. Okay, so I guess I'll have to try hundredths because that's my next decimal place. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. I can't do fourths in decimals. There's no fourths place. So I'm going to try to change this to a fraction, something over 100. Will that work? Does 4 go into 100? And yes, it does. And if you think of this as fourths, or going back to our money, quarters, how many quarters were in $1? 4 quarters in $1. So I can multiply 4 times 25 is actually what I need to multiply 4 times to get 100. So 4 times 25, think of this as 25 cents or 25, a quarter is 25 cents. And I can also do 3 times 25. And if you're thinking in money, that's like 3/4, right? So 3 times 25 or 3/4 is 75 cents. So 3/4 as a fraction can be expressed as 75 over 100. And we can write this one as a decimal. So how would I write 75 hundredths as a decimal? Well, I have 0 ones and 75 hundredths means 7 tenths and 5 hundredths. So this is 75 hundredths. So I have a model, a picture, I have a decimal, I have the fraction and another equivalent fraction, and then I'll let you guys write the words. And then I want you to try this one right here on your own. Write a decimal, fraction, try to simplify it, and words, and then we'll check it for tomorrow. And so I'm going to stop the video if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. My desktop's being recorded.